This week's show is a very special presentation by our friend and guest, Lorenzo. About a year ago, he recorded and gave a talk on Cherokee medicine at his local community center. He has graciously given us permission to repeat that talk with a bit of slight editing. I've mostly just taken out the long pauses and the chairs moving around and stuff that one gets at a public venue. The talk itself is about 2 hours long, and Lorenzo himself had split the parts into part 1 and part 2. So I'm just going to go with that. And this week we're going to hear part 1, and then the next show will be part 2 of this absolutely amazing talk on Cherokee medicine. I'm sure we're all going to learn a lot, and everyone will enjoy this just as much as I did. Special thanks to Lorenzo D. for allowing us to share this all with you.
Thank you all. Wish we could put us in a circle. It's too hard to put all the chairs back. Happy to see you all here today on this wonderful Watering the Mountains Day. The structure of today's talk is going to vary. I hold the outline. That one is running the show. What I want to say to start with is the topic, Cherokee medicine, is an enormous hole that one could fall in. It has a very specific meaning and always has, but it's been being stretched over the years. We also are at a critical time. I probably don't need to tell most of you who have heard people comment on 2012, which version of the Mayan calendar makes what difference to which set of elders, what all of the tribes from the Bible down the line have said about this changing time. Or like the old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. These are they. So to discuss Cherokee medicine, I'm going to have to go into a little bit of history. And there are a few of you I've met who are of Cherokee lineage here today, but let me see a show of hands. How many of you in the audience have tribal links, connections, blood, culture, heritage? Okay. Doesn't matter. You can all still listen, even you guys. Just looking at the proportion. Over the years with some of the elders I was raised with and the elders I've worked with here in California, some of whom were Cherokee and some were traditional California tribal elders. We have quite a mix of people, but the one thing that we have found in talking to a lot of groups is that there are some consciousness differences that have happened over the eons. If you go into genetics, then we've got a whole new mix as we have come into this age of the import of things like quantum physics, your DNA, the mixtures of everybody from everywhere, a lot of scientists, some who are very open to seeing what is happening with all of the changes, and some who still want to hold on to their pet theories like we all came across the Bering Straits to get here, even though that has long since been totally disproven. Our tradition brings us from the other direction this way, not from that way across. I'll go into a little more of that specifically as we go on. But the difference is some families have been here on the land long enough to be a part of the land. I mean, this culture has been going for pushing 300 years, as sort of as it stands today, not totally. But the hardest thing for people who have never been involved with tribal heritage or concepts seems to be the understanding that all life is one, that we are all related, stone, fish, bird, insect, all of the people, all of the races. We are all children of one Creator. the easiest way, well, another factor in that, I'll jump to that. What has happened, and the Cherokee are very typical of that, in that we were some of the first contact people who had heavy interactions with the varying visiting groups, from DeSoto to Sir Walter Raleigh and the Lost Colony to Jamestown, but it didn't start with DeSoto. Those cultures have been being intermixed for a long way back. And today we are finding an awful lot of people, as new information is coming up, as genetic information is coming up, who are saying, well, we came from here. No, we came from here. Well, we came from over there. And some of the genealogy of the DNA geneticists are saying it all started right here. Let's see, you're looking this way. So it all started right here in Africa. And then it went this way into Europe and across Asia and all the way around the globe in the next 20 or 30,000 years before they came across the Bering Strait and then finally came down into here. There are other theories. I don't know how many of you have seen this. How many of you have internet access? Look up expanding Earth. Have any of you seen that clip? There are a number of scientists who have looked at the globe. And we've been taught through geology. That was one of the fields I was going into when I went to college. And I know what we were taught in the early 60s, and it's not what we're being taught today. And at that point, everything was shift and uplift and drop and and most people who look at the globe with any degree of perception at all can see several continents that do kind of jigsaw into each other. And one of the more interesting things about that is parts of Africa and parts of North America not only kind of fit when you look at them, but the geology is the same straight across. The diamond dikes, the diamond mines in Arkansas, the diamonds and emeralds in North Carolina fit exactly with some of the ones above the Ivory Coast. The geological structure says they were together. And what this expanding Earth clip does is show you the Earth as we see it today, and then talks about the rifts and the breaks and the volcanic lines in the ocean beds, and then brings it back together and shrinks the Earth to a smaller ball, and it looks like Mars. It all comes right back together in a perfect jigsaw puzzle. Very little loss around any of the edges. It's there. And then they expand it again and show the rifts and the ocean breaks and the spreading. And you see all of that, and you see how the continents have twisted and turned. And yeah, there's some minor changes on coastline from washout and that type of thing. But essentially, it's all there. And then they pull it back together again, and it all fits. And if you look at all the genetics, I know Roseanne sitting here is going through a DNA process through National Geographic with her family. Because people see her as fitting in about 5 or 6 cultures and say, oh, you're Hopi. Doesn't fit what the family says. And then others will say, you're this, you're that. Well, the genetics she's looking at with her brother put them in some very interesting places. But looking at that stuff from National Geographic, and the main guy who is doing all of the stuff with the DNA is another one of those people with his own pet theory about how it went from Africa, and it went this way, and it went up there, and then it went all the way around. But if you go back to the shrinking Earth, and you go back to the years when it would fit that the fossil record shows that humanity is spreading in those directions, and it doesn't get to the edge of Africa and quit, and then all of a sudden funnel off up here and go over there. And the traditions of the tribes like the Iroquoian people who say, we came across from Atlantis before the final collapse of Atlantis and came up. through the Mayans, through the Yucatan, past the Aztecs, into the Mississippian culture, which was still full-blown before DeSoto came through. And if you look at that spreading earth, it's a short canoe trip. A real short trip to go across this way, and the timeline fits a lot better going from Africa across this way instead of going up around the Black Sea over to Siberia, all the way around that way, and then back around behind. So there are still a lot of things that are theories that do not fit if you really sit down and look at it. One of the problems I had, and part of the reason I left archaeology when I was in college, because if Breasted or Woolley didn't say it in 1882, you didn't dare forward it as a theory if you ever wanted to work again, because you would be blackballed. I have been on digs myself, and I personally have pulled artifacts out of the ground. And I know they were not in my pocket. I dug them up. But they were anomalous. They could not possibly, by current theories, have been in that place in the ground in that state from that age level. There's no way. So the artifact was put in a box, stricken from the report of the site. It no longer existed on paper, and it was buried in the basement of the museum. In the last 20 years, there are a few people like, well, we'll stretch it back a little further. There are a few professors like Barry Fell. How many of you are familiar with Barry Fell? His books are a little difficult to find. They're Saga America and BC America. Fell was a linguist. He's gone now, sadly. He worked, because of what he found, with a number of professors from Libya before Gaddafi, when things were still sort of open and you could go in and out, because he was noticing similarities between groups like the Zuni and the Berbers. Very strong links, not only in dress, in tattooing, in face painting, in building structure, but in language structure. And so he started pulling people and artifacts together, things that couldn't be read. A creation story that the Zuni say is in the old language. We only understand half of it. We don't know what the words mean, but it's a creation story. And when you read the traditional interpretation, it's good Pidgin Indian. But when he showed the original text to a couple Berber linguists, they read it like that. And it reads like some of the earliest Coptic Christian texts describing creation. And it's beautiful poetry. And looking at some of the artifacts, Fell continued to run into things, not only with the Celtic sites across America, including, I'm sure you've heard all of the flap about the one they found in Washington, that everybody was fighting over whether it was their remains or not, but they were a definitely Celtic-looking skeleton, and it way predated Eric the Red. So couldn't have been somebody who came into Vinland that way. It had to be longer. Well, there are pockets of artifacts. As a kid in western North Carolina, I picked up stones in the garden that had Ogam on them, the Celtic form of writing. I took them to the state archaeologist of that day and said, these were in Lincoln County and Gaston County, and they're not plow marks. And he said, oh, yes, they are. That's a plow mark. That couldn't possibly be Ogam. Well, I'm sorry, I know what that kind of plow will do to a rock of that size in the field, and these were not plow marks. There were any number of things beginning to show up like that around the country, across the East Coast and the central part, up the Mississippi and the tributary that it is. It's a wonderful highway coming in, across from the west through Hawaii and in those areas. So there was a time when these artifacts were fairly commonly showing up even in colonial America when nobody had seen Egyptian script at that point, archaic Egyptian script, or had seen any of the Phoenician symbols or writings. Nobody knew what it was. And it was out in museum, the artifacts were out in museums for a while, and then they just sort of got put away because nobody was interested anymore until 100 years later somebody realized that's an Egyptian inscription. It's talking about raising the Djed column. That's the beginning of the New Year celebration. And it talks about the Pharaoh Akhenaten. Funniest thing about that. They didn't know about the Pharaoh Akhenaten when it was found in Missouri. So there are things like that that showed up all over the country. Fell had enough to do a couple books, and there was a lot more that could have been done beyond those, I'm sure. He did the 2 books showing the shipping trade that was going on prior to the fall of Rome. The Romans were basically puddle hoppers. They had these wonderful little ships that wouldn't leave sight of land because they were worried about all of the things that can happen to you out of the sight of land. So they hugged the coastline. They admitted that the Celtic fleet was trading from Arabia to Russia and all over the place. Nobody talked about the other parts of the world, but the records exist. The maps existed at those points. But the Romans were giving us the Dark Ages, and so we forgot an awful lot of stuff at that point. When the Celtic fleet was destroyed, and Caesar admitted that it was a fluke of nature because a storm blew them inland so the Romans could reach them and messed up the fleet so they could destroy them, that was the end of the Celtic shipping trade, which had been going on for hundreds of years. The Phoenicians and the people from Tripoli area had also been trading through the Straits of Gibraltar all over the world for ages. There are Kufic inscriptions that are early Islamic in Arizona. There are pre-Islamic inscriptions at a number of points around America. The location of some of these is hidden because we know people would destroy them. They just have a wonderful time destroying artifacts and old inscriptions or painting mustaches and beards on pictures and images. So, human characteristics. So a lot of them are not talked about, including a map of North America and the Hawaiian Islands. And the shipper who was coming around from the Horn of Africa in the Arabian countries at that point claimed his island, where he talks in one of the inscriptions about his ranch. His name was Maui. You ever look at the Hawaiian headdresses, the old ceremonial headdresses from the time of Kamehameha? That almost Greco-Roman thing, the cartoon of the original scrub brush, probably. There are too many of these coincidences around the globe to say that we were birthed here, we stayed there, we spread out maybe 100 miles, and that's it. It took 5,000 years to go 200 miles. I think we're a little more inventive than that, and we have been throughout our entire history. And going back to the Cherokee, there is a reason for all of this wandering. We had on this continent 7 clans. The Alo, the old traditional story of the people, which describes coming from what my Kituwa elders told me was Atlantis and coming across into the Yucatan. Those things describe 12 clans, part of which were lost on the way here. The rest of the Iroquoians, which we are part of this language stock of, have 13 clans. Ours supposedly were lost, and the story describes how that happened and that we're still looking for them. because of some of the things that were seen when the first European colonials who were Christian got here. We had an ark type thing. From the description of some of the ceremonies, from the timing, their response was, they're the lost 10th tribe. A number of organizations have determined that we were indeed Jewish and the lost 10th tribe. We now have the Cherokee Nation, which used to be a huge area, and it was 7 loosely affiliated clans after the collapse of the Mississippian period, because DeSoto got in there first with the disease whipping through and mixing the genes unintentionally from the people who got them mixed. So we were becoming mixed bloods by 1450. Getting in 1530 was already mixed. Within 20 years of any incursion into a native area around the globe for the first time, there is usually a swelling of smallpox, other diseases that the indigenous people had never known, that suddenly start sweeping the area. Then you have a population die-off, people begin to build back together. In our situation, after the DeSoto situation, the Mississippian culture was still full-blown. Most of the books that you have written on the original tribal people here were written by people who considered them devils, monsters, less than human. It was not until a papal bull in the 1360s that it was finally decided that the people who filled this continent were indeed descended from Adam and Eve and therefore were human, but the Pope said they were less than adult. They were like children, incapable of managing their own affairs. Therefore, Big Brother had to take care of them and run the world for them. That moved into American law with the trial of Standing Bear in the 1800s. This is the seat of much of the work of the tribes from the 30s and the period of reestablishing governments after all of the relocations, trying to take over their own governments and their own affairs again and saying, we're not kids anymore. We don't need you to tell us how to run our business. We're adult. We can do this. All of those things affected what happened with all of the cultures in the area. Some tribes were totally wiped out, even after the DeSoto period. The number of people it took to run the Mississippian culture was enormous. There were millions here. We've been told by many researchers now that the figures that we were given in the history books before of how many natives there were in this country were grossly underestimated. You could not run the kind of national trade system that the Mississippian culture was with a small group of people. It took a sizable bunch to do that. But after that 20-year period and the die-out after DeSoto, it all started collapsing. People who were left in the various areas were bringing themselves back together. That's the first time our people were called Anyamwiya. We had another name that we used prior to that, still meaning the principal people. But by that time, we were starting to get called Cherokee. The R only exists in one of the dialects. Originally, there were 7 clans, 7 dialects of the language. So each area you were, or each clan house that you were in a town, the dialect was slightly different. Now we're down to about 3, really 2, with some slight variation. Some of that is because of disuse, because of the way people were thrown together. Some of it was because of the program that the United States determined at that point was what must happen for us all to integrate as children of one Creator. And that meant that we had to give up being who we were absolutely and totally and do it the European way and the European interpretation of Protestant Christianity at that point. They didn't want the Catholics in, but they allowed a bunch of Jewish people to come in from various places at that point. So this again comes back to one of the separated tribes who was in the area of, or clans, who was in the area of Kentucky and West Virginia. The Inagei was that group's name. Oklahoma went to them after removal for much of the genealogical information because the family lineages were related. But yet they would not allow them to be enrolled. We can use your genealogies because they're the same families, but you're not Cherokee. So totally against all of the ethics of the people, we were suddenly knuckling under what the plan was from the government above who was managing us to totally destroy all of the culture. And it was happening, and it was happening quickly. When the first mission schools were started in 1807, the children were brought in, but they were finding out one of the major 7 ceremonies of the year would come up, everybody would go home, they'd participate in the ceremony, and the kids wouldn't come back to school. And they weren't learning their English too well. Well, this went through a progression of penalties. And when they found the penalties wouldn't work, this extended beyond the Cherokee, but we were one of the early groups. There was a government program to destroy the elders and the medicine people. Because if they weren't there, there would be nothing for the kids to come home to. And they would have to hold the other culture. That went on for a lot of years. That went on for a lot of deaths. There were many situations where children were literally stolen out of the families and hauled away. It is now just beginning to be told how many unmarked graves there were at some of the church schools. We were all doing some pretty bad things to each other for a long time after the founding of this country. Sometimes a lot of the world, we're still doing it. We still have learned to live together as children of one Creator. We still need to work on that. But in the years when enforced Christianity was happening, one of the byproducts of that with the Cherokee Nation was you already had a split. Some of the clans had completely separated. A couple were starting to fade out because there were so many people being killed off everywhere. The rules were pretty strict on marriage rules and clan law, etc. The portions of the mixed blood community who were Christianizing more quickly were upset because at the same time we had a case going in the Supreme Court, which we won ultimately, and our lovely president of that day told the Supreme Court justice, you made the law, you go defend it, and violated it to do the removal. But by that time, the nation had already been so split that the traditionals, eventually calling themselves the Chickamauga, the original people, the mother town descendants, separated, and they kept moving further and further back. They kept trying to force the government to uphold the treaties that they had signed. And it was obvious they wouldn't, and the only thing to do at that point to stay alive was get out of the way. Even within the nation, so much bought into this effort that was going on in Washington to, I know it's a derogatory term, nothing else fits, as one of my Shoshone friends says, whitenize the people. So they would accept being destroyed, having their culture wiped out, being told that you have no right to be here, that you have no mental capacities, that you're no good, that you're useless, that you're less than human. All of this was to demoralize, break down, so that you can control. We still see around us the effects of fear. We see people now beginning to realize in this quantum awareness that we find ourselves in that we can change our world. We can change our direction. We can again come back to natural law. And we're responsible for that. They're not going to do it for us. And we can stop the fear that is being generated, because if you get somebody afraid enough, they'll do anything to stay safe and even forget what safe means.
You have been listening to part 1 of Cat's Eye on the Future. We'll return to the show right after these short messages. Do you have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melodi, just go to my website, melodipsychicreadings.com. That's Melodi with an I, psychicreadings.com, for information, or email me at melodireader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today? We now return to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future.
So, what I'm describing all of this political stuff for is to show you that none of us are beyond using the lower parts of our mind, but we are all capable of rising above that. During those time periods when that was happening, and what the colonials first saw when they started interacting with the Southern Five, specifically the Cherokee, more than anyone else, was that there was a phenomenal amount of knowledge there in the area of medicine. At that point, Europe had a lot of good bloodletters. Most of them were barbers. Rome had already pretty well started a setup to wipe out all the witches, the kitchen witches, the grandmothers who knew the herbs and doctored everybody for all of Europe for all of those years, because they were first peoples too. But there was a concerted effort there to wipe out the doctors. And they forgot. They forgot a lot of medicine. They forgot cleanliness. A lot of those things didn't figure anymore. When they saw the Aztec towns with plumbing and running water, and they were astounded because they hadn't seen anything like that in Europe. Try walking across the street from a second balcony overhang. We all heard those stories in school. At that time, the Appalachians were a greenhouse of amazing plants. They still have not cataloged, categorized, identified all of the plants in the Appalachians and the Smoky Mountains. And there's a great effort to do that, and like Mexico, South America, we are losing forests at a phenomenal rate, but it's not just the forest, the lungs of the land. It's all of the medicine the Creator put here to keep us healthy, that the first peoples had learned to use and learned to keep the world in balance. The same thing was happening to the Appalachians. They're dying off because of pollution from the strip mining in Kentucky area, all of the coal mining. The pollution is killing things off faster than we can identify them and catalog them. And they're working very hard to identify and catalog a lot of stuff. When I went back to the Carolinas in the late 90s for the last time to take care of my mother for her final 3 years, I was there. I had been there just 8 years before. And I stopped and gathered plants coming through the mountains, going into the western part of the state in the first ceded land that was old Cherokee country. My Scottish ancestors had moved on to as soon as the treaty was signed. And they were also buried in and mixed blood, so they moved right back into homeland. And so I grew up in those areas and knew those areas and knew through my ancestors and my elders their stories back before the Civil War, like hearing the stories of my playmates, because this was normal conversation. And I used to think everybody did this. I found out later that that was not true, that that was a more unique experience. But what I found out going back the last time, behind Mother's there was an entire hill on her property of yellow lady slipper orchids. They're medicine, but because they've become so rare, you use them sparingly. But it was an entire sizable hill, half an acre, all solid. When I went back a few years later, I found one. I stopped coming across the crest of the Appalachians to gather a few things that were there 10 years before, gone. I couldn't find any, and I was there at the right time. So you have a culture that has come into an area that's been there for several thousand years, that knew the land, that knew the animals, that knew the ecology, that's ethic was take care of it. You don't ever harvest a plant without telling it why you're taking it and asking it to help you. You don't do it until you can replant the seeds or replant the corns or a division. If you take, give back. You sacrificed something of value to yourself, a coin, a bead, your prayers, tobacco, anything that was considered sacred, to say, I need you. This person is sick. We need to do something about this. Together we can do this. Will you participate? There have been studies done in the last few years on medicines that were done the old way, like that. And medicines that were just, oh, that's the plant they used. Okay, take it. The difference is amazing. When the plant is asked to participate, it's a consciousness, it's a life form, it's part of us. The healing is faster and deeper. When you just rip the plant off and smash it and put it into something, it does some of what it does, but it's sitting back saying. The disrespect was something that would have never been allowed. The first thing you were taught, the process of becoming a doctor. At Chile, a student would apprentice to someone for anywhere from 15 to 20 years, and not until they were at least 50, and in our earlier culture, an adult at that point. Did you really start practicing on your own? Because there were so many different things to learn, not just the names of the plants or when to pick them or the songs to use to help them. And there are now studies about music that we are finding more and more. Sound, music affects the mind, affects the body, affects healing. There are sounds that can kill. I remember a whistle that was developed in the 50s. It was in popular mechanics. It was on a flatbed truck. And when they blew this whistle, it looked like a police whistle, but it, filled the flatbed truck. People died 50 miles away from that subsonic tone. We see finer refinements in sound and the awareness of what parts of the brain are affected. What we see, I'm a musician working with Alzheimer's patients. The parts of the mind and the body that music affects. When we go into an Alzheimer's ward, people can't find the room and they have to have assistance to get into the room. And we start to perform. Coordination returns for a little while. They can move. Some have even gotten up and danced. And you see them sing every single word of every song we're doing. When it's over, it may not stick, but for that little while, they're back. And we've talked to them at those times, and they are back. And so there's much that's now being done in that old knowledge that sound can heal. the trappings. I'm popcorning because I'm listening. A lot of people think they're not being doctored if there's not a show, a ceremony, lights, drugs, medicine blown over them, dances, chants, rattles. All of those things can be very important to different types of medicine. Because of the effect of sound, they are done in ways that will affect healing, that will affect the mind, that will affect the body, that will affect the will. And so in those cases, they are important. But also the first thing taught in Cherokee medicine to anyone who was apprenticing is first is your concept. Your link with Creator, your link with the person you're working with, your link with the ones you're calling to help, and your intent. If your intent is to change this situation, you're bringing that into being. You don't have to have the rattle. You don't have to have the song. You don't have to have the smoke. But for some people, you do. Some people don't believe that they can be healed or that something is being done to them until they hear that or until they see that. If they just see someone do that, they don't see energy, they're not aware that anything could have been transmitted. We now in science are again coming back to these same things which were taught for eons by indigenous healers around the world. The culture had a structured belief system. In that belief system was the fact that we are all children of one Creator. We are family. We need to be in balance. Natural law shows us where that unity, you're taught as a child to go out into the woods when you could still go without fences everywhere. And then you could still find silence without planes everywhere overhead. But you were taught to go out and observe. Observe the animals. Observe the birds. What did they eat? How did they react to different things? How did the animals function with each other? All of these things you were taught to observe from a very early age. And this jumps back to what I was saying about one of the hard things for people who grew up in a Western culture without that link to understand. And you get people who say, oh yeah, going out and hugging a tree, yeah, big deal. The tree huggers. Well, if you are brought up understanding that all life is one, you can touch a tree, feel the life flowing through it, sense the intelligence that's there. They don't think the way we do. They don't conceive. They're like the lily that's described in the Bible. Doesn't do anything, but I'm here. That's what I'm here for. I'm blooming. It's a celebration. Nothing else matters. But when you're taught to be aware of those things around you, it builds a basis for all of your knowledge, all of your interaction with each other, all of your communication. The ethic in that culture was always preserve friendship. We don't want to start a war. We don't want to get anybody upset. Everything was based around do what you can do to preserve right relationship, to bring everyone into right relationship. Yeah, bad things happen. Yeah, there are some mores that will help take care of that. But there were options out, even in the worst cases of a murder. There were white towns and red towns. The white towns were the peace towns where the peace chief resided. There was always a peace chief and a war chief. When the nation was in a normal situation, the white chief was in the forward seat. The Red Chief sat back. They were important voices equally, but during times of peace, which before a lot of the colonial system happened the way it did was the majority of the time, it was the peace chief who ran everything because the point was to keep everybody in balance, to keep everybody in harmony. But if you did something that was so heinous that you would have immediately been killed, if you could make it to a white town and survive in that white town for a year, at the next renewal ceremony, no one could ever again mention what you did. It was erased from the mind, no festering, no stuff hanging back there, getting worse by the years. It was erased. If you followed the prescription and you went again for balance and responsibility, it was erased. Totally erased. Ground zero. Same thing with lineage. If someone came in who understood the way and understood the people, the reason the Scots were accepted in so quickly when they first came into the Carolinas and the Virginias is because they were mountain people. They were clansmen. They understood that ethic. They understood the land, the balance. Today, we got a lot of mountain people who still live by the old way, whether they're mixed bloods or not, because they understand that balance of all life, that unity of everything. And so everything that was done structurally was done to maintain that balance. And then the one final ceremony at the end of the year to cleanse and restore everything. And at the end of those ceremonies, your dishes were renewed, the old ones were destroyed. Your clothes were renewed. Everybody went through the gathering and the unifying together, and then would go to the river, go into the river, bathe yourself, and let go of everything. Let go of everything in your mind, in your heart, your clothes, and you come out of that river clean. And what is past is a frozen lake. Can never come up again. You came out, you put on the new clothes, it was a new year. Those were important ceremonies. As we were told more and more and more that these things were pagan, that they were witchcraft, that they were really bad, that we were evil people, those who were trying to mix in so they'd be left alone were losing all of the old links. Some of the doctors who still observed the old ways and the old patterns and the old teaching moved into the woods, further back, further away. At that point, the mixed blood nation was even killing off some of the traditionals because they'd been convinced that anybody who was still doing the old pagan ways would be a hindrance to their case in Washington. So a light brigade of guards was even set up on the western border, while Sequoyah and White Path and a few of the other Chickamauga chiefs were trying to get people out of the nation to safety in Missouri and beyond. So I'm going to bring this up closer to a break by saying all of this is to show you, and quickly with the Klan thing, I may or may not show them to you, but there is one entire band that I mentioned they're calling themselves the Central Band. We now have Oklahoma, North Carolina, those are the Chickamauga, the Kituwa Society. They are the three remnant groups of the original Cherokee people who have federal recognition. Unrecognized is the Central Band. There's a Georgia band. There's a group in New York. The Cherokee started out before removal and scattered over the world. There was a village found at the base of the Rocky Mountains when the first cowboys headed this way, speaking ancient Cherokee, and they had all 7 clans represented in the town. I have traditions from a Hopi elder that I worked with about when our priests worked with their priests in Hopi land. I thought this was just something I'd been told by one of my elders until I bounced into them out here and we started sharing stories, which is something tribal elders will do everywhere, is get together and share techniques, ideas, stories. It helps put a lot of pieces together that wouldn't come together any other way. So at the same time, that group is saying, you got the Melungians, who are in a part of Kentucky, who appear to be Basque. They're darker skinned. They appear to have a lot of other blooded mixtures. They've been there since colonial days. Now there's a group who's saying, we are Jewish. There have been several Jewish artifacts found that are archaic in the Carolinas. There were a confirmed group of Jewish people who were brought in at one point and moved into some of Daniel Boone's bunch. So that group is saying, our genes are showing up at the DNA studies, and we've got Israeli genes over here, so the Cherokee are really Jewish. We are the lost 10th tribe. Got another group who recently started saying, well, that's not all of the genetics, and the last 3 chiefs had Islamic names, and so the Cherokee are really Muslims that came over in the 1000s. You've got all of these groups who are now saying, this is who we are, that's who we are, it came from here, came from that, this language remnant is here. You can look at them and, yeah, some of them are a real stretch. Some of them, yeah, they could be. But you look back at the history I mentioned before about the old trade routes. Pre-Celtic fleet destruction and Hannibal destroying the whole west coast of Africa shipping fleet. So if you had a group of Egyptians and Berbers in what we call Hopi land, and their fleet was destroyed by Hannibal, there's nobody to come get you or bring you supplies. You got 2 options. Roll over and play dead, or blend. And so we see from that period, there were admixtures of genetics from all over the world, a lot earlier than anybody thinks, before Muhammad. Maybe at the time of the lost 10th tribe, but they were coming from a lot of different places. And then we precipitated the Dark Ages and we forgot. So we have all of these mixtures. We have all of these genetics. And according to me, we have the memories. And so it is not surprising that as you get into certain types of ceremony or certain types of medicine that may open the mind or may shut up the noisy parts, that you'll actually begin to hear knowledge that is a part of your being and your body from lifetimes, from other places. And we're getting at a time where we can begin to understand that. And some people are stopping saying, you're crazy. And a few more people are saying, come talk. I had something like that happen to me last week. So people are opening to medicines which are ancient but still work. They're opening to themselves, they're opening their own awareness and their ability to explore and accept things. The one difference in the medicines, and we can talk about some of that in the second part, is look at what we're doing to the earth. With contrails, with pollution, with the drugs that are showing up in pristine streams. The same plants that I grew in North Carolina in the 50s, I can't access now. The soil's not there. The chemicals are different. The growing environment is not the same. And what that plant brings is different. And so in the same way we did it in the old ways, you can learn the plants, the medicine, the way to formulate, when to harvest, all of those things, but you also have to be observant enough to adjust. The earth is changing, we're changing. It's all different. And in the same way we used to be able to do it, you can go out into the woods and sit down and say, okay, I have this situation to do. I know a lot of you out there can do something to help. Who can show me something now with your chemistry that will help in this situation? And if you sit there and you're really talking to them and you're really looking at them, you're not crazy. Somebody will stand up and say, and when they do, then you can start talking. What do I need to do? What can you do? The same way we used to learn still works. Creator still spreads information to us in similar ways. After all these eons and times we don't listen, we can still listen the same way and get the information. Okay, I know this has been absolute and total popcorn, but there is a lot of that old stuff that heavily affects where we are today and what's done by all cultures today, and whether it matters or not anymore. We're going to take a quick little break for a few minutes, and there are a couple things I'd like to read you specifically about the state of medicine today, and then throw it open for questions and see where we go from there. Thank you.
Wow. I don't know about you, but I just found part one of the lecture, the historical background, everything to be just fascinating. Now, Lorenzo did want me to give an update and a correction. This was recorded a couple of years ago, and he had not realized at the time his lecture notes were correct, but he had misspoken. And the actual date when the Pope declared that Native Americans were human beings was actually, it was Pope Paul III, and it was from a bull called Sabius Dios. I can't pronounce it. Just please forgive me on that. But basically, it was passed in June 2nd of 1537 was when he announced it. It, again, as he said, it basically said that Indians or Native Americans were rational human beings with souls, and denounced any idea to the contrary, which is very different from a lot of the ways that the Protestants later, the Puritans in North America, viewed it. I had a history of the Americas class, several of them actually, when I was at university, and the history of the relations between Native Americans in South America and Central America, up even into Mexico, and those of North America are quite different. But that would be another whole show, so I'm not going to go into that at this time. I just want to thank Lorenzo for allowing me to edit and use this. I look forward to also presenting part 2 in a week or two. Next week may be an interview with my husband on the heathen holiday of Walpurgisnacht, but I'm not sure. If he isn't available, then we will do part 2 of Lorenzo then. Otherwise, we'll skip another week. And if you're listening and you really enjoyed his interview, there's another interview with Lorenzo that I did with him in California that is up in the YouTube archives at Time Monk Radio Network, and you won't want to miss that. But I think for now, I'm going to say goodnight and thank everyone for listening. I hope you enjoy some of our new musical selections that debut on the show. And with that, I'll look forward to seeing you next time at Cat's Eye on the Future. You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a look at what's coming up in your world and your future. Join us again next time for another episode of Cat's Eye on the Future.